So we're going to shift gears now on our second discussion, which is it's going to be fascinating, I think, and it's about the fourth industrial revolution. As I mentioned in our introduction, we are delighted today to be partnering with the World Economic Forum, whose annual Davos conference is one of the most important gathering of global leaders from around the world. And this year's conference's theme was focused on something that the World Economic Forum coined the fourth industrial revolution, a technological revolution that will fundamentally alter the way we live, work, and relate to one another. In its scale, scope, and complexity, the transformation will be unlike anything humankind has experienced before. So just as we in the fashion industry are getting to grips with the rise of information technology, now the fourth industrial revolution is set to radically transform fashion product itself through a fusion of new technologies that are blurring the lines between physical, digital, and biological spheres. And to discuss this topic, I'm pleased to introduce several experts who will help us to better understand how the fourth industrial revolution will impact fashion. Todd Harpel is the Director of Pathfinding and Innovation and Strategy at Intel. He is an experienced engineer, and he's worked there since 2005. He's conducted global ethnographic and design research, and presently he leads strategic innovation and pathfinding devices within Intel's New Devices Group. Over the past 3 years, his focus has been increasingly on the integration of computing into soft, flexible environments, including garments. Dr. Amanda Parks, to my immediate left, is a fashion technologist focusing on wearable technology, interaction design, smart materials, and fashion innovation. She is co-founder and chief of technology and research at Manufacture New York, where she leads a high-tech fashion and textiles R&D space with a focus on advanced digital fabrication, wearable electronics, and material science. And on the extreme left is Alan Marcus, head of information, communication, and technology agenda at the World Economic Forum, responsible for shaping the agenda across IT, electronics, software, IT services, and the telecommunications industries. He leads the Hyper-Connected World platform with a focus on 4 pillars: hard infrastructure, governance, mechanism, data, and cyber resilience. Now, I know those are a lot of big words, and I have to admit I don't necessarily fully understand what they all mean myself. So I thought the best way to start would really be having Alan introduce us to the concept of the fourth industrial revolution, so we can all kind of have a bit of level setting. This concept is really, really fascinating, and I'm sure Alan's enlightening words will help us to all understand what it all means.
Thank you. So I've never been at an event like this ever. So I have no idea how to translate this, so hopefully you guys can help me. So let me kind of get right to the heart of this. So as Imran said, this is about technology and integrating technology into a whole bunch of things. And technology shifts, in fact, are becoming one of the most important areas that global leaders are getting involved in and starting to recognize the importance. And this is all kinds of leaders. This is CEOs, this is governmental leaders, this is civil society leaders, and fashion leaders as well. And certainly, as we can see coming out of Davos this year, this notion of the fourth industrial revolution is resonating everywhere. I was just in Singapore last week. All they were talking about is the fourth industrial revolution. I'm on a plane this afternoon to Las Vegas at some geek techno show, and they're going to talk about the fourth industrial revolution. So,
and here in fashion, we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution.
So before the geeks, this is important, right? So as we talk with these stakeholders around the world, we reveal a series of really huge gaps in knowledge that are preventing people from really grasping the opportunities that are going to be created by the fourth industrial revolution. And then this leaves, unfortunately, some possibilities that there could be some really negative outcomes, and we need to work together to ensure that that doesn't happen. So some of the gaps include the gap between what is called the third industrial revolution, which I'll explain in a moment, and the fourth, which is essentially the gap between the implementation of digital and the ability to really grasp the value. There's a gap between hype and fear. Discussions around technology and society tend to be overly polarized, and which is, of course, can be confusing and create inaction. There's a gap between leaders and other stakeholders, particularly in the public sector, who tend to talk past each other, as we witness in politics here in the United States right now, and no one is really talking to the public. Everyone thinks they know what the public wants, but they're not really talking to them or particularly marginalized groups on some of these important matters. There's a gap between technology and values. We still tend to think of ethics and values as an afterthought, some kind of gateway that comes after a technology or feature has been developed. And we need to reverse this a little bit and make ethics a design principle, a feature rather than a potential bug. There's a gap between information and true contextual intelligence. Leaders don't quite know how technology fits into their huge range of concerns in a volatile world and how to prioritize it. And then there's a gap between the digital natives and the digital immigrants. Apparently, I'm a digital immigrant, according to my kids. So we're at the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution. We have an opportunity to shape it. We need to create a narrative to be able to shape it because stories are the way we create common purpose and that link people across sectors, cultures, industries, et cetera. And therefore, it needs to be powerful, compelling, and common. So what is the fourth industrial revolution? It is about the convergence of technologies, which is all built on the digital revolution. The first critical revolution was what Yuval Noah Harari called the cognitive revolution. 70,000 years ago, it was the revolution in thinking and social ability that enabled Homo sapiens to tell stories. So that's kind of interesting. The second big revolution came 12,000 years ago, and it was the agricultural revolution. 90% of the calories consumed by human beings today are provided by the same 6 plants that were first cultivated in what is now present-day Turkey. There were long periods of incremental technological innovation until the 18th century when suddenly a series of new capabilities developed during the Enlightenment led to the creation of entirely new systems of value creation and distribution. For the first industrial revolution, these included steam engines, rediscovery of cement and cement chemistry, breakthroughs in metallurgy, the mechanical loom, and others. So we had factories, trains, steamships, and a whole thing called colonization. Then from about 1870 to 1914, there were even more concentrated bursts of innovation, and the second industrial revolution came to being with fundamental breakthroughs that have made what we now call the modern world. This includes electricity, light bulbs, internal combustion engines, electromagnetic spectrums, and so on. And so factories and manufacturing changed, as did warfare and the structure of society, and suburbs were created for the first time. Finally, starting around 1960, the third industrial revolution, or what now people call the digital revolution, created entirely new capabilities through digitization and revolutionized commerce, social relationships, and et cetera. And it's important to recognize that these revolutions have many things in common. They're not so much about inventions, but about the creation of new systems. Lots of examples of discoveries remain marginalized innovations or curiosities, but did not necessarily change the world. Gunpowder, since I just came from the East, was certainly one of them. It didn't really change the world. But each builds in these revolutions on each other by necessity and spawns entirely new capabilities and systems. So a second was mechanical power and transformation of fossil fuels. The third was electricity and wireless into communications. And now the fourth will be based on digital and create the new things that we're talking about. And those things are things like 3D printing, but it's not just about printing, clothing or gadgets, but even a human heart has now been 3D printed. Computers that can think, deep machine learning, AI, these sorts of things, neurotech, chips and brains, precision genome editing, and new materials. Graphene is certainly one that a lot of people talk about, 100 times stronger than steel with a thickness of 3 angstroms, and if you don't know how thin that is, you basically can't see it. Shrilk, this is a compostable material inspired by insect cuticles and made from discarded shrimp shells and proteins derived from silk. It's thin, clear, flexible, and as strong as aluminum at half the weight. Right? These are some new kinds of advances. And my favorite one is called Q-milk. This is a thread made out of sour milk, thinner than a human hair, using the milk protein casein, and then the fibers are now resistant to bacteria and fire. So it kind of, using data and digital technologies, we get all kinds of things. So we don't want to fall into the gaps I mentioned before. If you're caught in a crevasse, you need tools and partnerships. So we need to be really clear of the distinction between the third and the fourth. We need to get the basic infrastructures right. We need to get data right. We need to appreciate new basic skill sets, creativity being one of them that was mentioned before. I think that's important, not just in fashion, but in every industry. Creativity is becoming a top skill that people need. And we need to understand the dynamics of platforms that are based upon this. Let's avoid hype and fear. Let's get across to all stakeholders. We need more interaction and more meaningful action in general. Get across values, map the space, ethics first, and ethics as a value approach. And essentially, what's a story about relationship do we want to tell? Do we want to write around technology and data and people? And what story do we want to live? I'll leave it there.
Okay. Thank you, Alan. So I think, you mentioned that stories are a really great way of bringing things to life, and I can see our two fashion experts on the stage nodding excitedly as Alan was speaking. And I thought maybe I could ask each of you, Amanda and Todd, just to help us understand this better, if you could just describe what you think the single biggest impact of this fourth industrial revolution. Alan mentioned a lot of things. What will be the single biggest impact on fashion? And describe that to me in a way that the layperson can understand using a story. So no big words, no fancy technology words, but what does this really mean for all of us?
Right. I'll start. Yeah, I did promise I would not nerd out, and I'll try my best.
Nerding out is totally fine. We just need to nerd out in a way that's accessible.
Yeah. So I guess there's two ways to think about it, and I think about it maybe coming at it from an educational perspective. If you were to start college right now, what I would tell you is either become a material scientist or become a data scientist. And these are the two ways that we're fundamentally going to kind of redirect the world. So with material science, obviously you mentioned some amazing materials, but we're also thinking about this convergence of interactivity. So when we talk about wearable technology, a lot of what comes up is more devices and gadgets. And then when we talk about textiles, we think more about fibers and just sort of things that are just about functionality of stretch, et cetera. But the convergence between those two worlds allows us to think about interactivity in the textiles, right? So you don't have to know, that we're basically rematerializing circuitry and printed circuit boards into fibers to make them functional, but you just can think about what do you want this garment to do? In the same way that you want a garment to have a particular feel or a particular kind of stretch or color, you can now say, oh, I want it to heat and cool in this way. So from the design perspective, from where kind of fashion designers are coming at this, we can really start to expand what we think about with functionality in a way that actually can change what the garment does in a way that things are usually thought of in technological basis. So robotics or things that you do on your phone, all different kinds of sensing interactivity, we can just say, I want this garment to do that. And that's one of the things that Todd and I are trying to do is open up this world. We want more creative voices. So we're not trying to turn fashion designers into electrical engineers. That's a very bad idea. But if we can start to kind of speak each other's languages and start to say, okay, what kinds of functionality do you want from the garments? What are both in terms of things that are more practical and functional, and things that are more about personal expression and identity. So that's kind of where this materials revolution is happening, is that we can really start to sort of demand interactivity from textiles and fibers themselves. And then the second thing is about data. And we are starting to collect so much data around our bodies, around our environments. I teach in the Columbia Architecture School, and there's a reason that I'm in the architecture school teaching fashion and technology, because it's, our bodies are mobile environments, and so we're reacting constantly with the world, we're reacting with each other, and so we're creating this entire mesh network of people through our systems and, through our mobile systems. And so we've never actually had access to knowing constantly, all the different things that we can understand about the body now, and translating this through algorithms and trying to create meaning across time, across populations, across environments. So this is what's really, really exciting. I think from a sense of, if you go back to the internet, the early 90s, it was basically a virtual bulletin board, and we had no idea kind of what was the capabilities that were going to come out of it. I mean, look at the shared economy and how the internet has fundamentally shaped the way that we live in the physical world. And we're at the same sort of precipice, with wearable tech, and it's really about how we will interpret that and really make use of the data. So it's not so much about form factor, right? We're still so early on. It's really about the massive network that we're creating.
Okay. Todd?
Wow. I could have given precisely the same answer, I think, but I'll take it in a different direction. Yeah. When I think about the relationship between fashion and technology in particular, I started mulling this over as soon as I heard we were going to be doing this panel, and the one thing I found we all have in common is magic. When we use the language of technology, Arthur C. Clarke, famous quote, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And then when we think about fashion, the language of the fashion magazine, the language of the fashion world is about glamour, about transformation, about, magic. It's all about magic. And when we start taking that a step farther, it's about making the invisible visible. We aren't data, we're being able to sense it. We're actually developing extrasensory capabilities right now. That's where data is coming from. It's our ability to sense it. It's all around us. At any given moment, my knee is bent at a certain angle. I can now measure that. It might be useful for therapy or something else. I might be able to tell you right now what my heart rate is, what my respiration is, what my, if I'm perspiring. All these things might let you know if I'm nervous or if I'm calm. All of this data is out there. It's just we're finding new ways to sense that. And wearable technology, the low-hanging fruit that we all think about are these things on our wrists and these things on our faces because they conform to what our traditional ideas about technology were. They're hard, they're fixed, they're a little bit easier to deal with, but this revolution is really happening at this intersection with material science, with cloth, with making things conform to our bodies and other spaces. And I came at this from the perspective of a social scientist. I'm actually an anthropologist by training, not an engineer. And so when I first started looking at this space and talking to fashion technologists, I started to empathize. And empathy is a key thing here. Being able to empathize with somebody else's perspective and understanding the troubles and excitement people were having around integration of technology. And it was like, oh, I want to put lights on this. I want to do that. And a lot of it is not even understanding possibility. So when people like me and Amanda cross these intersections and start talking to fashion designers, fashion houses, even opening up the possibilities, I start to see designers just, their eyes widen, and we hear this, wait a minute, you can do that? And I hear it again and again. And please, please, please don't lose that notion of we can do that. I think we're starting to see that. That's right, that's right. A lot of these are almost. And so I think the single biggest impact will be making, fashion, because it is on our bodies all the time. It is probably the oldest wearable technology. I'm pretty sure it will always be there and always be pervasive, as we like to say in technology circles. You will become the magicians of the future. This is it. We're going to do magic together through this alchemy of science, technology, the arts, all coming together at one space. So I think the biggest impact will be the alchemy that drives the future of what we put on our bodies.
It's fascinating because I think the term fashion technology is probably less than a decade old at this stage. I remember when I first started doing BoF and we were kind of at the beginning stage of this journey as an industry, the thought of fashion and technology even being uttered in the same sentence was kind of absurd. Mm-hmm. And most of the industry, I think, very almost impulsively rejected the idea. We're now 10 years into this kind of digital revolution, and we've seen how technology has shifted the way we market goods, the way we transact around goods. But what's really exciting to me about this is it's actually going to change the goods themselves. So let's start with some goods. And I think probably the easiest place to start with is actually wearable tech, because that's another term that I think a lot of people are familiar with because we've been hearing about it for a while now. However, it seems to me that we're far from having found kind of a killer app or a killer good, as it were. We've had these gadgets on our wrists and on our faces, and depending on who you talk to, and there are differing opinions, these have been successful in varying degrees. What do you think has been the big constraint so far in the way the fashion industry has been approaching the use of or the integration of technology into products? Why has it not resonated? What's been holding it back?
I think that's a tricky question, because when you say what's been holding it back or what's not resonated, you're assuming that there's going to be this big killer app, and that's the language of technology. And I don't believe that that's necessarily what's going to happen. I think slowly we'll start to see these things slip into the things we do daily. I mean, the watch I put on every day. And this watch isn't for everybody. When you look at fashion and even the technology market, actually the fashion market's even more fragmented than technology, right? Technology, there's a handful of big brands, a handful of people making things, but when we come to fashion, it's super diverse. So we might need to change the way we think about success, because fashion, I think it shares a lot in common with social science in that you have somebody specific you're designing for. In anthropology, we try to empathize with the people with whom we're trying to understand. Same with a fashion designer. You'll have, your woman or your man that you're designing for, and that man isn't everybody, and that woman isn't everybody. And so I think what we'll see with technology is we'll have to sort of recalibrate what we think success is or what that killer app is. We did our project with Opening Ceremony and Barney's, the Mika bracelet. Very successful for a very small, targeted audience. We had that audience in mind when we made it. And it was interesting that in the tech circles, if you read technology press,
it was seen as a failure.
Yeah.
That's right. But when you look at it in fashion magazines, do you see it featured? Do you see people talking about it? Yes, because it was a success in meeting its goal of serving a very specific muse, a very specific user. And I think we're going to see increasingly fragmented, unique technologies on our bodies. And I think there will be many killer apps. I think there will be many things that we love, just like we have a bag we can't live without and we mourn it when it goes bad or when we can't repair it anymore. Same with a favorite watch or favorite shirt. It makes me think of Seinfeld with his Lucky Boy shirt. But you have that favorite thing, and you have yours that's very unique, and it's unique to you. And I think wearable tech will even give us a better ability to make unique to you. And I think that's, if we shift the mindset to what's for a very specific audience, we start to calibrate our understandings of success differently. And I think that may well be where it is. We're not all going to wear an iPhone. It's just not the way it works with fashion. When we look at what we're wearing here on stage, while the categories are the same, they're dramatically different expressions of who we are, what wearable tech we choose to wear.
So personalization then is the killer app. Well, there's
so-
killer app, but
Well,
yeah.
I think actually emotion is the killer app.
Yeah.
And that is the language of fashion itself. And that what we're dealing with is the difference between the tech industry and what they view as success, and the fashion industry and what, like, the value systems, the priorities, the languages. I like to think about when we talk about iPhones, iPhone you can market, Apple has managed to market the same exact product to 7-year-old men and 14-year-old girls, and they can both kind of take that on and make it part of their identity in whatever way. But is there a single product in fashion that would be marketed to both those categories? I don't think so. And I think that what we're seeing is as we sort of cross over into the threshold of the body with devices, suddenly diversity is king, personal expression, all the value system of the fashion industry becomes the most important thing. And so the brands that will actually be very successful are the ones that will allow technology products to be, have very small niches, be super personalized, diversify. I mean, where is the wearable technology for kind of elegant older woman, someone who may really want to be tracking their health? Like, I'd love to have something to give my mother. It cannot be a Fitbit. She's not going to download an app. There's other markets for technology that are actually slow and last a long time. Like, where's the technology that you never have to upgrade? Like, that's its key, right? So,
Please, help me.
I know, yeah, but seriously, like taking it down and even thinking about sort of diversification of audience. For instance, the only wearable that I wear is Ringly, and the founder, Christina Mercando, is here, and we've talked about this extensively, but one of the key features of this is, first and foremost, it's just a beautiful ring that I love. And secondly, all it does is notify me very simply about a text or a call. And when we were sort of working on this at the beginning, people kept saying, well, what else is it going to do? When are you going to add more functionality? And the point was, no, it doesn't have more functionality, and that's why we like it. This is, it's very specific. Women have their phones in their bags. They miss calls, right? That's it. That's all it needs to do. So thinking about, how do you set up the relationship around explicit functionality and what the target audience you're going after, that's what fashion companies are so good at, those very, very niched and nuances about design. And now we can start to expand that into technical functionality as well.
The other area that I've been reading a lot about that I think is relatable is material science, because and we were talking last night at dinner about the convergence of wearable technology and material science. So as we move away from this idea that wearable tech has to be a gadget, actually wearable tech can be in the garments themselves. And I guess one of the easiest examples for people to understand is like athletic clothing that will wick away water, or even Uniqlo and their heat tech product, which I think is one of their best-selling products because it has a very clear functional benefit. As we look ahead to the future of this kind of smart fabrics or material science, how do you see that evolving, and what might be the ways in which creative people working in this industry might be able to think about using technology in the design process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, we think about it as sort of, when we're making something electronic, we make a circuit board and we design components and lay them out based on how it's going to function. And we can start to think about fibers in that same way. So let's use the example of energy, right? Whoever can solve the kind of a mobile energy issue, that's, a triple billion dollar idea, right? So, because everything needs power in some way. So for instance, Stan Steingart at Princeton in his electrochemistry lab is working on a fiber that is a battery. So it's a coating, an anode, and a cathode on a nanoscale that stores power inside the fiber. So it's not like there's a battery attached to the fabric. The fabric is the battery.
So I could attach my phone or
yeah,
something.
and right. And if you start to think about that being woven in with a solar fiber that collects energy passively from sun and light, that can be a fully contained system, right? So you can just say, my jacket is the battery. And that's something that is, kind of, I think, easier for people to kind of start to understand. And then there could be a fiber that also is the sensor for your heart rate, right? And maybe it's not a single fiber, but, we don't need to get into the complexities of what all these, how these things are going to be made. But you can start to think about, literally, your weave is your functionality.
Todd?
Yeah, I think Amanda's onto something there. Like, the materiality, like she said, your jacket becomes your battery, or it becomes your heart rate sensor. And I think we're on the verge of seeing that, and even being able to see, the classification of device change. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that need to be tackled with regards to how we treat patents, how we treat intellectual property in this space, because it's absolutely astonishing to believe, I could pull on a sweater that has solar on it, that's charging my phone. How do I patent that? Is that a garment? Is that
a design patent?
Yeah,
it's
what
a whole
is
new
this?
language, IP language.
And I think even our notion, when we start pushing into these new materials and new ways of conforming to our bodies, new ways of embedding, we're going to start to see new usages emerge, I hesitate to call them usages because that's really the language of technology. I mean, if you've seen some of the examples that I've been involved in, for instance, working with, Chromat, we did a project where we made a dress called the Adrenaline dress. And the dress is, it's 3D printed, so there's new materials on basic MakerBots. Just had a master, Francis Batanti, help us do that part of it. But the dress itself, it was responding to the notion of adrenaline. I mean, do you have clothing that tells you when you're feeling adrenaline? I mean, you can sense adrenaline in the blood, it's epinephrine, so we're not doing that. But your body changes, and you feel it in your clothing, right? You breathe differently, you might sweat, your body temperature changes, And we were sensing these things and actuating something based just on that. So the garment was expressing the inner physiology of what was going on. And yes, we did it in a very flamboyant way, a big frame that grows. But when you start to think about that and people start to talk to us about that vision, they saw a vision there of, if I have my mother and she's elderly, I want to know when she's afraid. I want to know when she's anxious. How might I do that without being bothersome? Or if I have a child that I'm providing care for who has, autism, he's somewhere on the autism spectrum. Wouldn't I like to know when he's focused and when he's not? These are all possible through the garments. And so in this way, we start to see new materials transform what our garments can do and to bring us together. And that's exciting to me.
Alan, you were going to say something.
Yeah, just a couple points that I think are important. One, this notion of kind of targeted audience, right? And fashion very much has a target audience. And again, not as an expert, I'm just repeating what I hear, but it makes sense to me. The other is, Amanda mentioned, like the iPhone, how is it possible it goes from a 14-year-old girl to a 70-year-old man? And if you really understand what's happening there with the iPhone or Google or any of these things, these are platforms. And I think this is a really important point. Because as a platform, people can come and add value in a way that allows them to interact with each other, but to be targeted at a very specific audience. And so you start to talk about the things we're talking about here with the different materials and fabrics and how to think about it intersecting with fashion. If fashion or the body or however is the right way to think about this is the platform, then you look at all of these components, the jacket, the ring, the watch, all of this is part of applications within that platform, and that the platform is going to deliver on some very specific things. So it's not just about what it senses, but also what does it do based upon that information. Everyone talks about sensors and wearables. You said, what's the killer app? Again, I kind of agree with them. I'm not sure that there's a killer app, but it's not just about what you sense. It's about how those different sensors are going to interact and produce an action. And those actions are going to be all kinds of things. I'm going to improve my golf swing, not because it told me what I did wrong, but because it actually can correct it. It's not just because it sensed an adrenaline rush, but it actually could take action on it, like do something that calms me down, right? And when you start to look at that and you think about what are all the different components and how they are fashionable but yet useful within that domain, then you're right, the ring never needs to do more than what it needs to do. And even the notion of, here's my battery and here's that's already too technical. It's I need power, and it's somewhere within the fashion platform. And it will power anything. And as long as we can standardize on what that platform is, that's why Apple's been successful. That's why Google is successful. And so how do we think about that? And how do we get the current tech wearables out of the hands of the technology people who have no idea, other than if I can't hit 1 billion people, it's not going to happen, quote Mark Zuckerberg. But into the hands of people who are thinking about how to create this unique application into the platform.
That's the key question for me, right? So if you think about the success of the iPhone, it was not the first MP3 player, but it was the first MP3 player that came with a platform that supported it, which is iTunes, which has supported the kind of survival of the music industry. But that whole iTunes platform has taken up, thousands and hundreds of thousands of app developers to keep it alive. How are, our industry's version of app developers are designers.
That's right.
They're fashion designers. How are we going to bridge this divide between the fashion designers and the technology? Because technology still, even though we're partway through this journey, it's still quite a foreign, sometimes intimidating, sometimes not appealing concept in the way many designers approach their designs. What's the trick to bridging the gap?
So a lot of things. I think that we need to. I don't know if this is the trick, but something that we haven't discussed yet, which I think is really important in this context, is about process and the process of making things. And this is something where I think fashion companies should be surging further forward. So, for example, technology doesn't really have fashion doesn't really have a history inside of its corporations of having R&D that goes sort of 2 years, 5 years, 10 years out. And I think that there's a massive opportunity right now inside of textiles where fashion companies have a particular expertise around feel, fit, how they want things to perform, and also just kind of generally about textiles that technologists do not have. They don't understand the process of making those textiles. They don't, and so there's this massive kind of gap there of knowledge, or that can be sort of filled in. So I think that we need to have deeper conversations and interdisciplinary teams kind of looking at those processes, because also technologists, things that are being worked on in academic labs, there's a huge missing piece of how do you, Dan Steingart can make 3 inches of this battery technology in a fiber, but he can't make, thousands of yards of it. And so, I mean, when we went down to Dan's lab with a team from Intel, and then took everybody, his students and the Intel guys, over to Shimoseki to show them a 3D knitting machine. They had never seen this. They didn't even know how they were going to weave this fiber. Like, how does a fiber become a textile? Like, this was really, these are PhD scientists. And so just thinking about, this, opening that up to them to think about creating a 3D knit out of this thing, how would they even do that? And then also talking to the technologists, or the kind of expertise around 3D knitting, saying, can we put this fiber in your loom? Will it, in your machine, will it break it? So that's where the fashion industry really could be surging forward with research. You don't need to really be thinking about electronic circuits. We want you to be thinking more about the integration of textile engineering, much more into your owning your own supply chain around your yarns, fibers, and textiles.
Yeah.
Yeah, arguably, Amanda told the story of coming from textile to technology. I could easily tell it coming the opposite direction. So, we have this shared history, technology and the textile industry, with, back in the earliest of days, the Jacquard loom using, punch cards. Same as early computing, same as Babbage's machine, which became early computing. It came
before. The Jacquard loom was arguably the first computer.
That's right. That's right.
So fashion came up with the first technology, computer?
The first computer, effectively, The first programmable technology.
It was the first programmable technology,
And if we follow that thread, at Intel, we, of course, talk a lot about Moore's Law. And everybody, you might have heard of this thing, and if not, it's okay. But Moore's Law basically says that every year and a half, technology will be able to double the amount of transistors in a given area. So what that means is we can enable different experiences over time. When we were first starting making things, a little over 50 years ago, when Moore's Law was sort of made before it was even called a law, we were working with mainframes. We had room-sized computers, and that dictated the kind of things we could do with them. And as we move along over time, our chipsets have been getting smaller, faster, more energy efficient, so much so that, this is how we start moving toward fashion. We start talking to CFDA, they're like, well, when you can get computing the size of a button, then we'll talk. And of course, for us, we have a bunch of engineers, they're like, challenge accepted. And we came out, our CEO walks on stage holding this button-sized thing that he actually detached from his coat. So that the Intel Curie module, and it's getting that small that it can be a button, and that button can be a tracker. That button can sense things, it can process things, store things, and it's opening up possibilities. I like to think about technology as being able to expand the fashion designer's toolkit. So when we start thinking about that future, it among other technologies will help us to figure out, wow, what would you like to do today? If you could perform any feat of magic on this body, this garment, what would it be? And by talking wildly about wild possibilities like that, I think we push the envelope even farther with material science, with our technologies, and customize them. And you said platform. I think things like the Curie drive toward that notion of a common platform. Let's get this compute so small that it can be embedded in a notion, a garment, in a ring, and move from there.
So, Imran, I would say, too, just everyone should be aware. Every industry is having exactly this conversation. How do I understand this technology, particularly at the rate it keeps changing? I'm a doctor. In fact, David Agus, who wrote the book End of Illness, if you ever read the book or even parts of it, he talks about he had to bring an engineer in. So as a doctor, he didn't understand the technology either, and he didn't understand how to think about medicine leveraging technology. So he brought an engineer in, and he spent months and months and months with an engineer not to create some new medical therapy or treatment, but just to understand how to apply medicine in a different way. And it ended up creating this whole book, this whole way of thinking about, why illness exists and how we treat it. And so the parallel with fashion may not be clear, but that notion of don't expect to say, okay, I've got to become some geeky coder, engineer type in order to accept this. I think that's kind of the point being made here. It's how do you leverage the fact they already exist and bring them into part of the discussion, be that multifunctional team. But understand that the challenge that everyone's going to have is every industry is looking for that same set of people, right? And it's going to get more and more difficult. And the advantage I think that's here is that level of creativity that a lot of other industries are sorely lacking and are going to struggle without.
Which is why Amanda said, if you're going to become, or if you're a student, become a material scientist or become a data scientist, because those careers will be very much in demand.
Yes.
There was one other angle I wanted to explore, which is about the consumer. Because fundamentally, this industry is about, as we said, earlier with Victor, and again here, that it's about driving emotional engagement with the consumer. Some of the examples that you guys are mentioning, I'm just wondering, does the consumer really want that? Do they want the adrenaline jacket? Do they want the genes that can measure the, how do we also get the consumer involved in this conversation to make sure we're not just going down the garden path to creating stuff that sounds really cool, but in practice, who wants that? Where does the consumer get involved into this conversation? And what can we learn from other industries in the way they pursue this?
Okay, so one of the things that I like to talk about is, why can't fast fashion work like Snapchat? So to kind of cross-industry it. So we're not inside of fashion, we're not going to get rid of this desire to want to have newness, personal expression, things that change constantly, and that we can change our identity and ourselves. And so fast fashion has evolved as a way to do that. And I'm not saying that we should actually get rid of that, but what we should be doing is thinking about material characteristics that are appropriate for that, so that disposability doesn't have to be a dirty word. So, for instance, he was talking about shrimp chitin. One of the labs that I work with at the Media Lab at MIT is working on a 3D printer that works with shrimp chitin, which is the waste product of shrimp. So basically, imagine a line of summer jewelry. I love costume jewelry. Print it, wear it for the summer, and then at the end of the summer, throw it in the ocean. This stuff dissolves in salt water. It's 100% sustainable, right? So we can start about material appropriateness, so things that are supposed to disappear, and literally market it as this really will be gone in 3 months, so wear it now while you can. Get it while you can, which is what Snapchat is. It creates this kind of buzz. It's going to be gone. And then there's things that are supposed to be heritage, and that we make them in materials that are appropriate for how long we want them to last. So that's one way to think about think about the kind of consumer behavior, what's already out there, and try to kind of recreate and understand the science that's appropriate for that means.
Okay. We didn't talk as much about new manufacturing techniques as I'd planned, just because the first part of the conversation was so interesting. But I do want to talk about it a bit, because the point you raised just now about fast fashion also brings to mind this idea of sustainability. And the industry is one of the greatest challenges we have to face as an industry is managing our footprint, our environmental footprint, the kind of renewability of our resources, which are being depleted, this wider climate crisis that we're facing. And it seems to me technology can also play a role in this, and particularly in the way we think about making things. What do we have to learn from what's happening now with regards to the fourth industrial revolution and these new manufacturing techniques that could help us as an industry provide solutions for addressing these kinds of challenges?
I think when there's increased consumer demand for sustainability, increased consumer demand for an understanding of where our materials are coming from and where they're going when we're done with them, I think that starts to shift that discussion a little bit. I mean, we made a move toward conflict-free minerals, and it's a big deal, right? When we're starting to make things out of the right materials, then figure out how we recycle them afterwards. I mean, all these smartphones and other technologies right now, it's not clear how we do cradle to cradle. And I think we're all starting to think about these things, you know, and especially as we start doing more manufacturing, like additive manufacturing, extrusions and things like that, where are those plastics coming from and how good are they for us? I mean, people like Amanda are experimenting with using organic materials like the shrimp chitin, like other things, to sort of head off that part of the story. But I worry about, you know, garments. You know, when I have silver thread in my garment, am I recovering that? How? And
But you
who's
could use
responsible?
other materials that are conductive, that are biologically based.
That's right.
There's circuits that are magnesium and silicon that dissolve inside the body.
When we start thinking about, it made me think of bioluminescence and these materials that naturally chemically do something, whether it's conductivity or glow or whatever. I think we'll start to explore more of these spaces as well to find things that are both useful to modern manufacturing, you know, in new ways, as well as more environmentally friendly. You know, it's a tricky discussion, right? You can come at it from 100 different ways. It's just a matter of figuring out which way makes sense for a particular product or for a particular application. You know, so I'd like to think that cradle to cradle, or circular economy, as I've seen it called in the World Economic Forum, becomes just part and parcel of what we do.
Yeah, I think that there's two directions on this. One is the way that digital systems in general can help us with these problems. So understanding your supply chain, understanding not making too much of a particular product, the overhead, and thinking about where does it make sense to make things, responsible production, and how we can use digital information technology to manage that better. But then the other answer, and I will give this answer for everything, but the answer is biology, right? And this is the essence of the fourth industrial revolution to me, is both the incorporation of the materials of biology and the systems and processes of biology, right? So we can have, it's not just a sort of hippie, like, oh, we're gonna make hemp clothing, this kind of thing. It's saying we can take a cell, understand its metabolic processes, and use it to either to create, what we want from our materials, or we can basically use the systems that are already in place. I like to say that sort of we can solve all the world's problems with mycelium and algae, like across the board: food, energy, textile, whatever we need. Like those are the two things that the next generation needs. So mycelium that's the root product of fungi, mushrooms, and it has created basically the largest social network that literally goes across the world, like underground. And so biology already knows how to solve all these problems for us. We just have to get in there, understand it better, and mimic it.
And we can grow leather in the lab right now.
Yeah,
Do you want to
absolutely.
talk a bit about that? Because I think that's like, leather is such a controversial material in the industry. And, it's obviously a finite resource. And
I think what's so interesting is right now there's development of leather that is bacterial, that is fungal, and that is mammalian, all going on in labs right now. And they're all going to be sustainable and used for different ways. So bacterial cellulose, which is literally the waste product of fermenting kombucha, it gets thrown away. You can dry it and turn it into a leather. Suzanne Lee, who started something called BioCouture, is that now at Modern Meadow. It has some issues about dissolving and like how long it will last. But that if you need like a short-lasting leather, this is potentially your answer. Then you have mycelium leathers, which are just coming out, which are you can make basically the same plant will give you something that is like concrete and something that is like leather, and you can do unbelievable things to discolor it, etc. And then mammalian leather, which is much more closer to what we have now. Yeah, taking cow cells, any bovine cells, and controlling them in the lab. Right now, it's expensive, and because it takes a long time, and the materials that we need to kind of feed them are expensive to develop artificially, et cetera, et cetera. But we're getting there. But a lot of this is, I think about luxury and science as being very similar, like science kind of being the ultimate luxury. They both take a long time, they're expensive to work on, and they're rare to be done well. Yeah. And so we can actually use that as a basis. If you are making a really expensive bag, you do have the luxury of using lab-grown leather. It can be expensive.
So, Imran, one of the other challenges as you look at some of those biological systems and its opportunity is different governments are reacting in different ways to the ethics of some of these things and what it might mean. And then even in terms of the costs, are some where there's big grants being given. And the reason I bring this up is, again, from a competitiveness standpoint, the fashion industry needs to be at the table in those conversations. They have to be, because other industries are at the table in these conversations and working with these governmental leaders to try and shape what that would look like. And so somewhere the industry's got to get together and start thinking about, you know, what's going to make most sense for us and how do we get involved in those conversations. And that's like something you see a lot at the World Economic Forum, you know, why we talk about it as circular economy. How do you get all the industries together and really look at the balance of what makes sense? And can we reduce costs in areas that is much more interesting for a more broad-based use? And can we set policies a little bit saner to help us accelerate some of these opportunities?
And let me just add one thing to that, because both Todd and I are involved in something called the Revolutionary Fibers and Textiles Manufacturing Institute, which is Obama's latest manufacturing institute, and it's $300 million of grants. And we are basically inviting industry partners in, and we, quite frankly, want more fashion companies. We have a lot more kind of tech companies and companies like DuPont, like material companies, but coming to the table, you can apply to basically get matching money. So you put in $1 million for something that you want to develop, whether it be a textile or whatever, and you get $1 million back from the government, and you also get a network of industry partners. So partner with Intel, you get, you know, Intel, DuPont, and labs from MIT coming to the table, helping you to make this product. And it's real, and it's sitting there, and we're starting. So.
Yeah. Super excited
Yeah,
about
me
that.
too.
I mean, there's notions of like
the DOD
systems on fiber.
We just had
I
the
mean, can you
announcement like a
imagine?
month ago with the DOD. So.
Well, I don't know about you, but this is a vision of the future of fashion that I think is really different than maybe we all walked into the room with this morning. And I want to thank all of you for your very, very inspiring and interesting vision of the future of fashion. I think, you know, that's our responsibility, is to think about the fashion industry in a different way, and that's why we're doing these Voices conversations, to bring people from outside the fashion industry to engage with and dialogue with us, because I think sometimes we fall in the habit of being fashion people talking about fashion to other fashion people. And Voices is really about, you know, bringing in a wider group of people to have conversations with. It's the voices inside the industry and the voices outside the industry that we'd like to bring together. So unfortunately, we've run out of time. That's all the time we have. I'd like to thank our principal partner for Voices, QIC Global Real Estate. They've partnered with us on events in Sydney, Australia, in Hong Kong, China, and here in New York. And later in December, they'll be our lead partner for our first global conference happening at the Soho Farmhouse. I invite all of you to visit our Voices website and check it out. We're receiving hundreds of applications. We're curating the most interesting group of people, not just on the stage, but also as part of the community, and we'd love to see all of you there. And before you leave today, please grab a copy of our latest print edition of The Business of Fashion. It's called A Connected World. It explores some of the topics that we've discussed on stage here today, and it's not out until next Monday, so you will be the first people to have it in your hot little hands. Thank you all for joining us, and I wish you a lovely afternoon.